Yo, what's up guys? How's it going? So recently I've been getting a lot of questions about how to get the best cinematic settings out of the DJI FPV drone. Because let's face it, the way that it comes out of the box, it's not necessarily the best. For most people, the DJI FPV drone is going to be their first FPV drone. And let's face it, if the video quality sucks, no one's going to stick with the hobby. Like, flying FPV is fun and all, but if the end product looks like garbage, then is it really worth it? So today I'm going to show you guys the settings that I use for the DJI FPV drone, and hopefully you guys can get some cinematic footage out of it. So it's actually like 8 AM out here right now. You know, I like it to be quiet when I fly, not a lot of people around, and also the lighting is pretty good, so kind of worth it. So first things first, you want to get your goggles on and you want to go into the settings, and we're going to adjust a few things, alright? Oh wait. So as of now, there's actually no way to record inside the goggles. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and made you guys a cheat sheet, which is going to appear on screen while I speak. And that'll help you really dial in your settings to get the best, optimal, most cinematic settings for the DJI FPV drone. Okay, so first things first. What you want to do is you want to go into the settings on the goggles, then hit camera, then go into camera parameters. First thing you want to do is you want to change the shooting mode to manual, and then adjust your shutter speed to 1/120. What this will do is it'll create the most natural motion blur. So when you're flying really close to the ground, you're going to get that really smooth, buttery looking motion blur. And if you put this setting on and it's way too bright, you're going to need to get some ND filters, which are almost essential on this drone. Now, Freewell makes a bunch of really good ones, and what I can do is I can leave them in the description below for you guys, and you guys can check those out on your own time. For your transmission setting, you can leave that at high. For your video quality, 4K at 60 frames per second, which is the default, is what you want. And then for your video format, you want to stick with MP4 because it's going to be the most compatible across a large amount of devices. Okay, awesome. So that was the basics. Now if you go down within the camera settings, you're going to see advanced camera settings. This is where the magic really happens. So first thing you want to make sure is that EIS is turned on. This is your electronic image stabilization, and this is going to do a lot of the smoothing and stabilization for you, so you don't have to do any of that in post-production, which is awesome. Next, we have distortion correction. Now you want to make sure that at the very least, this is turned on for your aircraft, and what that's going to do is that it's going to remove that fisheye effect that the drone kind of creates, and the props are not going to be in frame, which is essential to getting really good cinematic footage. Now, whether you do it for the goggles is a personal preference. I personally actually turn it on for the goggles as well because I like the horizon to be flat when I fly, and I don't like that whole fisheye lens look into my world when I'm flying. So I like to keep it flat, but it's completely up to you what you do for the goggles. But I highly recommend that you turn on the distortion correction for the aircraft itself. Okay, so if you keep going down, you're gonna see image roll correction. You wanna make sure that that's turned off. You don't really need that. For your video codec format, by default, it comes as H.265, and that's what you wanna stick with. It's the most easily digestible video codec for most computers, and it's gonna make editing way easier for you guys. Next up is probably the most important part. You wanna go into your color profiles, and you wanna change over to D-Cinelike. Now, what that's going to do is that it's going to create a much flatter color profile, and that's going to give you higher dynamic range, which is going to give you a lot more flexibility when you're editing this footage in post. Now, the main part of this is that we switched over our color profile to D-Cinelike. So now capturing the footage is only one part of this. The second part comes when we go back to our computer. But first thing we're going to do is we're going to fly around a little bit, capture some footage. Now, I'm going to be flying around in full manual mode. These settings are going to be effective for normal and sports mode, but to get the best FPV-like feel, you want to be flying in manual, and that just takes time and practice. So I recommend that you guys spend a lot of time in the simulator, get familiar, and go ahead and fly in manual as often as you can. Okay, that's enough talking. Let's get into it and let's get flying. Okay, awesome. Let's get back to the studio and see what we got. Okay, so we're back now, and you might have realized from that footage, but I kind of forgot to hit record. But luckily I had some old FPV footage that I had saved when I was practicing earlier, and it's all still flown in manual, and it's actually flown exactly with the settings that I showed you guys earlier. So all the editing techniques that I'm going to show you right now for how to get the most cinematic footage out of your DJI FPV drone will still apply to this footage. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way and my genius mistake, let's dive right into Final Cut Pro 10, and we're gonna see how to edit this log footage that comes out of the DJI FPV drone. Okay, so welcome to Final Cut Pro 10. This is my editing software of choice, but no matter what editing software you're using, you should be able to create a similar effect or a similar look for your footage once you apply all the techniques that I'm about to show you. So first thing, we've already dropped our clip right here into the timeline. So you can see that this is the drone clip that you guys saw earlier of me just flying around this neighborhood. Now, first thing you're gonna notice that it's super flat, and we've done that on purpose due to the D-Cinelike color profile that we use. So when I'm editing, I usually like to use an adjustment layer. So I'm just gonna drop that on top, and basically what an adjustment layer does is that I can make all of my settings to this sort of upper crust layer, and if I want I can turn them off so it doesn't directly affect the footage permanently, and I'm able to make changes later if I want. Okay, so now that we have that, first thing I usually like to do is I like to drop in some sort of LUT, and it's completely up to you. This part is optional. I like to use my own LUT that I've sort of developed for a bunch of DJI footage that I used to use when I had the Mavic Mini. But you're gonna see from this LUT that it is way too dark and oversaturated in a lot of areas. So I actually like to bring the mix down to something like 0.2. And so that way the color is just a lot more subtle and it's not too overbearing, because we are gonna be making a little bit more changes. So next thing you wanna do is you wanna kind of jump into the saturation part here. So you want to drop in a hue and saturation effect onto your clip, and what we're going to do over here is we're just going to increase the saturation to around 0.53. That'll give it a nice little bit of punch, and we're going to change the value to 1.11, and that'll just help brighten up the colors a little bit. So already our footage is looking a lot better. Next thing you want to do is you want to jump into crisp contrast. Now I'm not sure what this is going to be called in Adobe Premiere, but in Final Cut Pro 10 it's called crisp contrast. But it is a little bit too heavy in some areas, so we're gonna go ahead and reduce the contrast to around 28.17, which is where I like it, and that looks good. That looks good to me. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add in a little bit of sharpness just to get that little bit of extra punch out of the footage. So I've gone ahead and dropped sharpness, and 2.5 is an okay amount for Final Cut Pro. That's the default amount, and I usually like where that is. Now, where the DJI FPV drone really struggles is in the blacks and in the shadows. So something that I like to do, which is kind of like a finishing touch, is that I'll go ahead into my color curves, and I'm just going to create a subtle S curve while lifting the blacks off of the curve for the Luma value as well as all the other RGB colors. So just give me 1 second while I do that really quickly for you guys. And this is actually a trick that I learned from Peter McKinnon through one of his Lightroom tutorials, where he went ahead and changed the Luma curve and the color curves for all the colors, and it really adds a nice little punch and effect to your video. Okay, awesome. So now that we've gone ahead and done that, we are pretty much done, and the footage looks way better from when we first started to where we are now. And I'm gonna play them side by side just so you guys can get a real feel for how good the footage looks now compared to when we started. So check it out. And that's it, guys. Those are the settings that you need for the DJI FPV drone, and the quick and dirty for how to edit that footage to get the most cinematic footage possible out of the DJI FPV drone. Now, hopefully, if you thought before this video that good footage wasn't possible out of this drone, I've hopefully managed to change your mind. And if you're interested in purchasing the DJI FPV drone, I've left that link below in the description as well, so you guys can get your hands on it today. As always, if you guys enjoyed this video, leave a like at the bottom, smash that thumbs up button. It really helps out the video. If you guys like hanging out with me, you know the deal. Subscribe to the channel. Other than that, I'll see you guys next time. Keep creating.